First, I must apologize for the late start. You know how things go, people arrive late, trying to get everyone together, but we're ready. So I'd first like to welcome you to this workshop hosted by Caribbean Export Development Agency. If for those of you not familiar, Caribbean Export is the regional trade and investment promotion agency. We represent the countries of the CARIFORUM region, which is the CARICOM countries as well as the Dominican Republic. Our aim is to make the firms, you, members of the Caribbean, firms export ready so that you are competitive on the world market. One of the initiatives we've been working on is intellectual property. Intellectual property, we've found as we've gone throughout the region is that many firms throughout the region are not familiar with intellectual property, and when they are familiar, they're not protecting their intellectual property rights as they should. So we have been trying to raise awareness. This workshop here today is to assist in raising awareness to you, the young agripreneurs, to raise awareness about intellectual property and what you need to do in order to protect your intellectual property rights. Today we have Miss Erica Smith of Intellect Management Services. Erica has very vast expertise and knowledge and experience in the area of intellectual property. We've been working together throughout this year and last year on raising awareness through the region on trademarks in particular. But today she will give you a broader overview and an introduction to intellectual property rights and what you as young firms need to be doing. So please welcome Erica. Thank you.
Good morning. So as Ms. Scallop was saying, it's an introductory session. I'm going to try to make it as easy to understand as possible. So if there's any terminology or if I say anything you don't get, please feel free to ask questions. So I would like to get a sense as to the profile of the audience. How many of you are actively involved in farming? Oh, okay. Well, I guess that takes care of the profile. All right, well, that's good. I don't know where you are in terms of your, like, if it's a hobby, if it's a business, but hopefully what I say will assist you in some way. So we are a little late, but we will make the session as interactive as possible. So I want you to look at this question, and I need 3 to 5 responses, which I'll note, and then we'll come back to it at the end of the session. So, what do you think are the top priorities for the development of agriculture in Barbados and the Caribbean? I just don't think about it too much. 3 to 5 responses, and essentially at the end we want to see if what we have discussed today helps to promote these priorities that you identified. So, who's going to start? Oh, I'm sorry, I need to also, there are some people joining us by live stream. So welcome. So let's go, Roberta. Who's going to start?
Yeah, good morning. Market availability.
Sorry?
Market availability.
So improved marketability?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Roberta, there's also, yeah, okay.
To go with market availability, also the access to markets, whether the transport mechanisms.
Improved access to markets. Okay.
Hi, grading and standards.
I heard standards.
Grading.
Grading?
Yeah.
Grading and standards. Okay.
I would just basically say improving the food security that we have in the Caribbean.
So improving food security, very important.
I would say research and production of literature on products.
Research and literature. All right, one more and then we'll continue.
Improving yields and varieties.
Okay, improving yields and variety. All right, thank you.
Just one
Oh,
last,
sorry.
please. Ensuring that our real agricultural lands do not come out of agriculture and into other non-productive sectors.
Ensuring agricultural lands. Okay. Well, that's a very good start. So thank you. And we'll make sure we have enough time to come back to this discussion question. All right, another question. These are well-known consumer products. Laptop, the Yeezy sneakers, and the Tesla S, or S, I think. How did these come about? I mean, they're not natural products, yes? Necessity. Okay. Any other responses? Okay. Well, there's a saying, necessity is the mother of invention.
Innovation.
Innovation. Okay. Well, the point is someone had to think about them. Someone had to create them. Someone invented them. And that's what we're here to talk about. Intellectual property rights. What are intellectual property rights? The WTO, the World Trade Organization, has a definition where they state that intellectual property rights are the rights given to persons over their creations, the creations of their mind, intellectual creations. They usually give the creator an exclusive right over the use of this creation for a certain period of time. So if you create or invent something, you have the opportunity to have a legal right which gives you exclusivity, which means only you can determine how and who uses your invention or creation. And that's what intellectual property rights are. And there are different types of intellectual property rights over different types of creations and inventions. We'll discuss those in detail as we go on, but really important, intellectual property rights do not protect ideas. So that's why I stressed creations. So you may have an idea for something, but you actually have to move to the point where you create it in order to benefit for protection. If you got exclusive rights over an idea, so for example, an idea to have a circular thing that rolls that you can put under a seat and move people. In other words, a wheelchair. But the wheel, you just have this idea for this circular thing that moves. That's it. You haven't expressed it any further. You haven't figured out how it'll work exactly, the type of materials, et cetera, et cetera. It's just an idea. You wouldn't have intellectual property rights for that. You have to express it in a bit more detail, show how it would work. If you have an idea to do a book on a love story, it's just you're going to do a love story, nothing more. You can't have exclusive rights to a love story, which means you're the only person who will be able to ever create a love story, whatever that means. So you're not getting protection for mere ideas. These rights grant you property rights. So as with any other form of property, once you have been granted these rights, you can sell them, you can license them, you can transfer them, give them away. And in some countries, you can even use them as a form of security or collateral. So they're assets you would have in your business just as you have land or machinery or capital. The ownership of these rights are also business assets. So for those of you who are familiar with financial statements, you would see these as assets. For example, they'll be reflected on your balance sheet. So there's real financial benefit to the ownership of these assets. They're not like other traditional forms of assets in that they're intangible. These aren't assets you can see or feel. There are many forms of intellectual property rights, and they're usually grouped, traditionally they're grouped into two groups. Intellectual property, which is now used as a common term, but traditionally intellectual property referred to copyright. And then industrial property. Now, I assume you may have heard of trademarks, you may have heard of patents. And of specific importance to you today would be geographical indications and new plant varieties. And I'll explain what those are and how or if you find them important for agriculture in the Caribbean. So I'm going to touch very quickly on copyright. Copyright may be of some relevance to you, but it is not the focus of today's session. And I'm just going to explain copyright because at the end of today, I don't want to hear you talk about copyrighting your business or copyrighting your invention, because people use the term a lot and usually incorrectly. So copyright is a form of intellectual property used for the protection of literary and artistic works. So you will get copyright protection for books, for music, paintings, sculptures, those types of artistic and literary works. Unlike the other forms of intellectual property that we'll learn about today, copyright arises automatically. In other words, you don't have to go and register anywhere to have copyright protection. It just has to be, whatever the work is, has to be original. And usually in many legislations, in many countries, you have to have it recorded in some form. And it has to be able to be categorized either as a literary work or an artistic work. Once it meets those requirements, you will have copyright. Any questions on copyright before we move on? Because I'm not going to go back to copyright really. If you have a website and the content on the website may be subject to copyright protection. If you have like little brochures and flyers, they may be subject to copyright protection. So it's not that it is not applicable to the agricultural sector. It's just today we only have limited time, so I can't go into everything in too much detail. Okay. So today's session I've grouped into a few distinct areas. And the first one we're going to look at in some detail is in terms of branding and the use of intellectual property in branding. And in this regard, we will look at two primary tools, trademarks and designs. So it's okay to have or to own intellectual property rights, but you need it to make sense for your business. You don't just want to register these rights and have them there. You want to actually be able to use them. So first, we will look at trademarks. So what is a trademark? A trademark is a sign which is used to distinguish your business or your goods from those of a competitor. And to have a registration for a trademark, it has to be distinctive. What do I mean by that? You can't, I gave an example, have food, the word food for a food product. Food as such is a generic term. Distinctive would be made-up words, for example. So a good example would be Kleenex. Kleenex, a lot of people, now this could get a little tricky. A lot of people may not realize that Kleenex is actually a registered trademark, that word. And they always stress it's a registered trademark because it's in danger of becoming generic, meaning that when you want a tissue, you may just say, give me a Kleenex. You're using the word Kleenex as the generic term for tissues. If you have a trademark and it becomes generic, you're going to lose the registration. So Apple, for example, Apple wouldn't work for an apple. A type of apple is a trademark. But Apple works for Apple as a computer product, as you know, mobile phones, etc. Because for that type of technology, the use of the word apple or tree or orange, something totally unrelated, makes it distinctive. So when you're thinking of a trademark for your products, you want to make sure they're as distinctive and memorable as possible. Other distinctive trademarks would be, do you know ExxonMobil for gasoline and gas products? That's a made-up word, Exxon, it means nothing. But it's distinctive. You remember it, it stands out. So a trademark can be a name, including a personal name. It could be a word, a phrase, a design. It could be numbers, it could be letters. A trademark could be the shape of the good or product. So think of the Coca-Cola bottle shape. Why would that be a trademark? It's distinctive. It distinguishes the Coke product from competitors. When you see it, you know what it is and what it relates to. A sign or logo, or any combination of those can all be used as trademarks. In some jurisdictions, you can also have trademarks for sounds. So the Harley-Davidson engine, that sound it makes, that's a trademark. You can have it for scents, for smells. Those can also be trademarked. Anything that can be used to distinguish your business or your products from those of competitors. So you come up with a trademark for your product. You register it so that you get exclusive legal rights over the use of that trademark. The trademarks are registered for territories, for specific territories. So if you decide you want to register a trademark in Barbados, it's only for Barbados. They're registered in classes. What does that mean? We have different types of products and services out there, and they're grouped into classes. There's a system for these classes called the NICE classification system. It's online. So you are making T-shirts, and you want a trademark for the use of, to use the trademark with T-shirts or clothing. You would have to ensure that you register the trademark for the class that T-shirts fits into. what does that mean? When you register for a specific class, it means someone else can use a similar or the same trademark in another class. So you have to think through it carefully. If you only register the trademark in one class in one territory, and then you decide you want to export, and instead of T-shirts, you want to use for jams and jellies, for example, that's a totally different class. But you wouldn't have registered a trademark for the export market. So if you want to export to Trinidad, you would need to make sure you register a trademark in Trinidad. And if you're going to change the classes you're going to be offering goods and services in, you would need to ensure that you also register for those classes. So you need to bear that in mind. Usually, the registration is for 10 years initially, and you would then have to renew it if you want to continue owning this trademark. As long as it doesn't become generic, you can keep registering it indefinitely. So this is why the owners of trademarks will make every effort to ensure that it doesn't become a generic term, because they want to be able to secure those rights for as long as possible. Any questions so far? Am I boring you? You have to prevent it from becoming generic. You'll see that they always use this sign for a registered trademark next to it, the R in a circle. So you always, anytime you have the word or the logo or whatever, you ensure that's a fits that symbol so that there's always an awareness. And if you see people using it or trying to use it, generally you will normally advise them, no, this is a registered trademark. So you have to be able to constantly monitor and ensure that the public is aware this is a registered trademark. That doesn't mean it wouldn't become very popular, like the example of Kleenex. But at the same time, they're going to keep ensuring that, no, this is not a generic term, this is a true. And sometimes even in the dictionaries, you will see, even if they have the term used, they show it as a registered trademark. Right? So, sorry, yes? Please use the mic so that the people who are joining us on the stream can hear you.
Right, but excuse me. In cases where the product may just be extremely popular, say like a Ziploc bag, but you know Ziploc is a brand. Mm-hmm. Everybody refers now to these Ziploc bags as Ziploc bags.
Yeah.
You know, so like it has become somewhat generic.
Yes, but you're going to, as the owner of the trademark, every time you use, and you can show that you've tried to enforce it. Once you can show that you have been enforcing and advising and notifying that it is a registered trademark, there's still that danger, but there's a better chance that you'll be allowed to keep it as a registered trademark.
Okay.
Right. So these next few points are really important. A registered trademark is not the same as going and register for a business name. A lot of people think when they go and register for a business name, they now have the right to use it. However, but it's not going to give you the rights of a registered trademark. They're separate and distinct. There's nothing that would prevent you from having using the same name you have for your business name as a registered trademark necessarily. But you would need to go and register it as a trademark. They're not the same, and the rights granted are different. The business name or the company registration, that's all they give you the rights to use as a business name. A trademark is not the same thing as registering a domain name. They may be the same. So Gucci could be a trademark, but you can also go and register www.gucci.com as a domain name. And you want to do that. So when you're planning out your business, and you mentioned marketability and marketing, et cetera, and developing your brand, you come up with a business name. You go and check, it's available, you register it, great. But to strengthen the awareness of that name in the market, you would also want to be able to use it as your domain name. So you would go and also check, and you should do these things simultaneously. So before you go and register the business name, and then realize you can't get the same name for a domain name, no, don't waste your time and money. Do all your checks one time, and for the social media handles as well. All right? So you're able then to use the same name in different ways, and therefore reinforce or build awareness for that name, and therefore build your brand. Trademarks are usually first come, first served. So when you're doing your business planning, you don't want to, if you know in your business plan, you're going to start in Barbados, but you're going to, within the next 5 years, going to Trinidad and St. Lucia. You need to ensure you look and try and get those registrations in Trinidad and St. Lucia as soon as possible. What can happen? Realistically, you can build a brand in Barbados. We have tourism, we have social media, etc. People become aware of the brand, even if it's not available in their territory. And an enterprising person may say, you know what? I like this brand. People like this brand. Let me register in St. Lucia. Maybe I could set up a similar business at some point in St. Lucia, or when you are ready to come to St. Lucia, you will have to come to me. Because guess what? I own the trademark in St. Lucia. So either you're going to have to pay me and buy it from me, or license it from me, or you're going to have to enter St. Lucia under a new name and develop the brand. So as you plan your business, you're planning the territories, you're planning the classes of products that you might want to eventually apply this trademark to. You're going to check the domain name registrations. You're going to check the social media handles. You're going to check the business names and ensure that you have availability across all of these platforms. Now, there's such a thing as an unregistered trademark. So this is where you don't go and formally register it, you just use it. And over time, it's possible for you to get some common law rights, some rights over the use of that unregistered trademark. It means it's a higher hurdle than if you just had the registration, but it is possible. And why is that important to know? It's important because if you've been using this unregistered trademark for years, and then somebody comes along and tries to register the same trademark for the same class of goods in the same territory, you may be able to prove that you have these common law rights, and those are based on first to use. So there are circumstances where even though you haven't registered a trademark, you can prove that you were using it, people know it's your product, they associate it with you, etc. But it is a harder level, it's a higher level of proof, so where possible you want to go the route of registration. And I know people get nervous because it means you have to spend some money. But you plan these things, and you know you have your milestones for those of you who have done business planning. So you may not be able to do everything from the start, but if you plan and you know, okay, I'll try so that at least I can do my trademark in Barbados within the next 6 months, do it for another island within the next year, etc. So you plan these things. Any questions? Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yes, Erica, I'd just like to know the cost of registering a trademark internationally. What kind of numbers are we looking at?
Thousands of dollars.
Oops.
Yes, but in Barbados, to register in one class starts at, I think, $75. Yes, so it's not totally out of your reach, right? But by the time you want to go into, or if you're thinking of international markets, I would hope that your business would have reached the stage to support international market entry, yeah? The big brands, the really big companies register their trademarks globally in all territories and in multiple classes. But you're not that level, and you can plan it. You're going to be entering only specific markets, etc. So don't let the cost scare you. The scarier thing is if you don't register the trademark and somebody else registers it. So after you've spent all this time and money building your brand, you then meet this barrier. I think that's scarier, and there are actual examples, Caribbean examples, where that's happened, and where then they've had to actually change the trademark, start from scratch, etc. So when you're measuring up the costs, all of these are the factors you have to consider. I mentioned the importance of doing the searches. A lot of people jump in blindly. So remember and do the searches to make sure what you're thinking of using is available. I gave an example here of a local brand, Carmitas. To be honest, I don't know if it's registered or not. They don't have the symbol attached to it. But I'm hoping that, by now, there's enough awareness that it is a registered trademark. All right, so we're going to transition into another type of intellectual property right that's used a lot to help you build your brand. And these are designs, industrial designs. So if you have the right to a registered industrial design, it means you have the right to prevent third parties from making, selling, or importing products which bear the same design or one that is similar for commercial purposes. Right? So you get certain exclusive rights attached to the ownership of a registered design. And by copy, what does this mean? It's an absolute right. So if you came out and registered a design, and somebody independently in St. Lucie sits down and comes up with the same or very similar design, it happens. But you have registered it first. Even though they didn't deliberately copy from you, they will own the exclusive rights. And that's it. You can't do anything about it. If you use your design in business or in commerce, you will be infringing their rights. So the last point here, I said, think of how Apple uses design. Design has become a very important competitive tool. If you think about it, if you're the phone he's recording with, one of the first things one of the first things you look at is the design. You look looking at cars, you're going to look at the design. The first thing that catches your eye, one of the things that distinguishes what would otherwise be very similar products in the marketplace is the design. So even if the technology, the basic underlying technology is the same, if one looks better or feels better than the other, it's that will probably capture the market. So the design helps to create meaning and differentiation in the marketplace. And when I say meaning, again going back to Apple, Apple has been able to create meanings for consumers. People, one of the first things you think is they look really good, the Apple products. The second thing you may think is they're really expensive. Through their design and positioning in the marketplace, they have been able to put themselves up there as premium products. Consumers think they work better, that these products work better. All of these are meanings they have been able to develop primarily through the use of design. I think it's an area that we need to have a lot more focus in the Caribbean because it speaks to the aesthetics of things. And one of the shortcomings you will often hear is that our products don't look good. They aren't packaged nicely. And this is exactly what design speaks to. Sorry. Yes?
I have a question from online.
Yeah.
Question on trademarks.
Mm-hmm.
I was told I have to state all possible products in my application. With agro-processing, the options are wide. How can I register what is in view and still plan ahead?
All right, first of all, even if they're asking you to list all possible applications for this trademark, you have to know the business you're in. So if you know your core business is, as I said, jams and jellies, that's what you're going to focus your trademark registration on. The classes that are relevant for jams and jellies. In terms of the future and possible other applications, it's about your business planning. What I would usually tell a client is you're going to start out with jams and jellies, your business plan. You hope to extend to pepper sauces, which would be a different class. You have to have a sense of when you plan to do that expansion, and then plan your registrations around that. You can't possibly, unless you have vast financial resources, do the registrations for all classes up front. And in some territories, even if you try to do that, there are provisions that say you have to use the trademark within a certain period of time or it can be revoked. So you can go and register your trademark, and usually if you haven't used it within 5 years, you can be challenged. That registration can be challenged, and it can be revoked for non-use. So I would suggest, as I do, I tell all entrepreneurs, all business people, plan. Do a business plan. Have some timelines, and budget according to those timelines. Do your registrations according to those timelines. All right. So in terms of your trademark, you understand how that helps to develop your brand. To repeat, a trademark helps to develop your brand because that's how people know what it is. They know your products and services because of the name and the logo, etc., attached. And you want to make those as distinctive and as memorable as possible. And people will start to, over time, when you do your marketing, etc., build that association. Similarly with design. There's some designs from the time you see again, if you think of the Coca-Cola bottle, from the time you see that design, you know that's Coca-Cola. You build association. Beyond that, you're building goodwill. You're using these tools to build goodwill with consumers. What do I mean by that? Simply put, you're building a reputation with consumers. You're using your designs and trademarks to build a reputation. when consumers see these things, they think in terms of, oh, that product or those services from that company are usually high quality. They may think they're expensive. They may think they're reliable. But this is the sort of, you're building a reputation, and hopefully a positive one. And by building a good reputation, using these tools to build that reputation, you're going to build sustainability. You're going to build loyalty amongst consumers. And it's going to help you in terms of maintaining or attaining a position in the marketplace. So we're not just here talking about intellectual property rights because it's a buzzword or because you were told to come and hear what I have to say. You're thinking in terms of how am I actually going to use these in my business. And of course, the link between branding and intellectual property is that these tools are protected as intellectual property rights. Most branding tools are protectable as intellectual property rights. Any questions? Because I'm going to transition. How many of you have a trademark? It doesn't have to be registered. It could be unregistered. Okay, and of those who raise their hands, how many of these trademarks are actually registered? Okay, one. And it's registered in multiple territories? Okay, and what is this trademark? All right, wait for the mic.
My company's logo.
Okay, and why did you decide to register your trademark?
Because I didn't want to spend the effort building a brand and persons know of the brand, and I want to formalize my thing. Then I realized that somebody else would have registered that. And then now I have to be paying them big bucks to get that, so
okay, and
did it from early.
And it's registered in how many classes?
2.
2 classes. And do you plan to expand or to register in other markets at some point?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, any other experiences using trademarks or designs? Does anybody have a registered design? Did you know about industrial designs before I mentioned it today? Was anybody familiar? Okay. All right, so yes, there's another question.
Oh, hi. I just want to know about the industrial designs. When you say copy, it has to be an exact match, or it could just go like similarities to the product?
It doesn't have to be exact. It has to be very close. It has to be similar. But it doesn't have, it can be an exact copy, but it doesn't have to be an exact copy. And what I didn't mention, and I don't know how I didn't, but when we speak of designs, we're talking about the appearance, not the function. So we're talking about the appearance of products, right? Any other questions?
So,
sorry.
If it was an exact copy and it was like, I created it and I start selling it, I would got to pay the person to. You
would be infringed if you have copied in an exact or substantial manner a registered design, a design that's registered, say, in Barbados, you would be infringing those rights, and they would be able to take action to have those products removed from the marketplace. Maybe if they can show that you knew you were infringing, have you paid damages, etc.
And the shape of goods, you keep talking about the Coca-Cola bottle. So that shape, I see a lot of drinks, got the same shape. So I would have to pay Coca-Cola.
I just use Coca-Cola. I don't know if it's, I think it started out maybe as a registered design, and eventually, because a registered design, the rights don't last forever. It's usually a maximum of 15 to 25 years. But whilst that could have been a design, it's also used as a trademark, right? Because you can have shapes as trademarks. Designs are used a lot, for example, in the fashion industry and things like furniture design, etc. But let's say the Coca-Cola bottle is still a registered design, then anything that substantially copies that would be infringing. Similarly, if it's a trademark, the shape is the trademark of the Coca-Cola company. You could infringe that trademark by coming out with a similarly shaped bottle.
Okay, thank you.
There's another question here.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Maria Jackson. In regards to the trademark and similarities to the product, I'm into chocolate making, and back home, our biggest competitor is Hotel Chocolat. And I traveled to the UK a few months ago, and I was told that there's this particular shape of chocolate that they make. It's a shape that is being used from the beginning, from inception of their company. And,
the inception of which company?
Of their company,
Okay.
Hotel Chocolat. It's a competitor back home. And there's another company who tried to use a similar shape in molding their chocolate bars, and they started production and they had to make that large recall because they actually were infringing on the rights that Hotel Chocolat had on their registered mark, their trademark, the shape, the similarities were almost the same. So they had to remove all of the products on their shelves because of that right. Another question is trademarks in regards to the music, the lyrics, the beats that people make.
Okay.
How does that apply?
Right. So not trademark, copyright.
Copyright.
Yes. Copyright. Copyright is a form of intellectual protection you would use for artistic works, so music, etc.
So trademarks is only for...
Trademarks, you can, in some countries, have a trademark for the sound, right? You can also have the situation where you have, a company might have a associated jingle or that could work as a trademark. So years ago you had like Coca-Cola, is it? Yes. But usually these are copyright protected.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or okay.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
You just now asked the young lady about the classes, I believe, of her registration. Could you explain that and the different levels that are involved? For a startup company, which classes are recommended for us?
I have no idea what business you're in, so I can't make a recommendation on classes. What I can say is because there are so many different types of products and services, they have grouped them into these categories or classes. So when you register a trademark for use for jellies and preserves, that's a class, a specific class. Let's say that's class 24. And then you have a separate class 25 that includes pepper sauces. And then you have another class for consulting services. And so there are all these different classes. So you need to know what products you're going to be offering, and then you can consult. There's this, you can actually go and see the listing, so you know that based on the products I want to offer, I would need to register in class 24, or I may need to register in class 24 and 26. You got it? It's online. I can tell you afterwards where to find it. All right. Okay. Yes?
We have another question online. I would like classy packaging for my product, but there are limitations in Barbados. I am concerned that when I finally am able to get the premium packaging, people would not want to pay. What can I do?
That's not an intellectual property question, but what I would say is to work with a good designer There are a few product designers here, and I think BIDC also has a product designer on staff. And a good designer will be able to offer options at different price points. So I think if you can find a good product designer, you can have different options that are classy but not too expensive. And just to make a point, because usually when we talk of designing in Barbados, people think of graphic designers, fashion designers, maybe even interior designers, but there are persons who are product and industrial designers as well. So it's, like I said, it's not an IP question, but it is one of finding a good designer who can offer you options based on materials, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so we're going to move on. So I was talking about the importance of designs and trademarks in helping to establish your brands. And I've placed on the screen two logos and a product bearing their logo. And I just quickly wanted to ask you, what do these communicate to you? Now, a lot of you are farmers, so when I did this, I tried to use agricultural-related marks, and I hope you're aware of these marks. And I just wanted to quickly have you tell me what do they communicate to you when you see them? Good quality, poor quality, etc. It's just an exercise to show how these tools help to build the brand. So, Delish products. For the Bajans in the audience, when you see that Delish logo on a product, what were your first thoughts? Nothing? Do you compare, does a comparison come to mind? You go in the supermarket, you see Delish. Next to it, you will see, let me just make a disclaimer. So you may see Windmill or what have you, but one brand name will bring to mind certain things that the other brand wouldn't bring to mind. So any comments at all? All right. The West Indies Sea Island Cotton. Now that is the logo you may not be familiar with, but you may have heard of West Indies Sea Island Cotton. Does it bring to mind anything when you hear of it? Sorry.
I was just saying, back home we have this company named Sea Island and Cotton Shop. Is that?
No, West Indies. Well, this is very specific to the cotton grown on certain islands. Okay. And for those you have a comment. Let me hear what you have to say first.
Hi, good morning. My name is Anastasia. When I saw that logo, my mind registered that it's been around for some time. It just looks like it's a company that is very old.
Well, that is so very true. Yeah, it's an old logo, yes. For those who know about West Indies Sea Island Cotton, it may bring to mind the fact that it's supposed to be very high quality, premium priced, etc. Anyway, there were just examples as to how the use of brand, logos, trademarks, designs, etc., communicate to the consumer. All right, so we're going to transition, and maybe this is what you're more familiar with, but we're going to talk about the use of IP rights for community and rural development. So the use in agricultural especially. And we're going to look at two areas, the protection of new plant varieties and geographical indications. So have you heard of the protection of plant varieties? Did you know this is possible? Okay, and yeah, the graphic is of different varieties of carrots. So what is a plant variety? So over time, for many years, we've had the selective breeding of crops to get those which are more resistant to disease, produce higher yields, etc. So we're talking about the systematic breeding of plants through the discovery or creation of genetic variation in plant species, and with the aim of increasing productivity and quality through the breeding of varieties with higher yields, resistance to pests and diseases, and higher nutritional value. Right? And for those who are farming, and we'll talk about it in terms of animals a little later, but for those of you who are farming using plants, you would understand the importance of selecting the right varieties. So what isn't a variety? A variety does not consist of plants of more than one species. So you're looking at a particular species. An existing plant or part of a plant, unless you can use those to propagate a variety. The characteristics of the plant. So if it's a dwarf or not, that's not the variety, that's a trait or characteristic, right? The type of breeding technology you use, that's not the variety, that's the breeding technology. And a variety has to be capable of being propagated in a stable manner. So if you can't say, oh, I developed a new variety. Someone was giving me an example yesterday where the tree, first it was giving them limes, and then it changed and was suddenly giving them lemons. And, no, it has to be, no, this is a real story. It was some sort of engrafting that went wrong, but it has to be stable, right? So a new variety, if you create a new variety of plant over time, it has to remain stable. So we spoke about why people engage in breeding, plant breeding, and there are a number of economic and environmental benefits that result. We have the introduction of new breeds, and you're able to demand higher prices. So if you come up with a higher yielding breed variety, plant variety, you can charge more money for that. And this is important for farmers in terms of agriculture, in terms of horticulture in the Caribbean, and in Barbados especially, where we're into growing flowers and different varieties, etc., and for forestry. So to develop a new plant variety isn't something that you'd take a couple months and do. It takes a lot of time and investment. They reckon it takes 10 to 15 years to develop new breeds. You have to invest in the land, the equipment, the labs, etc. And therefore, there is a form of intellectual property right granted as an incentive, so that after all this time and money, you have the exclusive right to this variety, and anyone who wants to use it would need to pay you to use it. So they give exclusive rights to the breeder over a specific period of time, and after that time has passed, the rights fall into the public domain. Now, who is a, yes? Mm-hmm.
Okay. Two questions that go back to industrial designs. I don't know if you want to take them now or wait to the end of plant variety.
Let's record them so that I'm not, so people are not distracted. So let me hear what they are, please.
Okay. The first question, do regional standards for products affect the development of industrial designs? And the second question, is it costly to register in every country you plan to export to? What is holding up the Madrid protocol that would allow registration globally?
Okay, we'll definitely come back to these.
Okay.
These are design and trademark.
Thank you.
All right, so who can get the rights to the plant variety, a new plant variety? It's normally the breeder. And who is a breeder? A breeder can be an individual or it could be a company. And it's a person who bred or discovered and developed the new breed. So you can't just discover a plant variety. You have to develop it, right? It could be, if that person is employed, then chances are the employer, in as far as it was part of their job description, etc., it's the employer who will own the rights, or whoever the rights, they've transferred the rights to. There are no restrictions in the type of methods or techniques that you use to breed a new variety. So it doesn't have to be the most sophisticated as long as it meets the requirements. However you did it, the technique used, there are no limitations. Yes? Yes?
Thank you. Can it be accidental? So if I discover that in a controlled environment that I'm being a little reckless or something and plants are cross-pollinating or interpollinating or whatever it is, how can I seek to protect that?
Right, so that's akin to a discovery. You have to actually develop it because the thing is it has to be uniform and stable, the variety. So you have to still spend years ensuring that across generations it is a uniform and stable variety. Now, the protection of plant varieties that is actually very much promoted under trade agreements, the international trading system. So like the World Trade Organization, they promote the protection of plant varieties in member states. And the main convention used internationally is the International Union for the Protection of New Plant Varieties, of New Varieties of Plants, the UPOV convention. And as I was saying before, the variety has to be novel in trade. It has to be distinct, uniform, and stable. And protection is offered for a minimum of 20 years from the issue of the variety, in the case of plants, and in case of vines and trees, a minimum of 25 years from issue. So you come out with a new variety, and it's registered, you have exclusive rights for 20 to 25 years. So when we were talking about the priorities for Caribbean agriculture, why is this important? It speaks to issues of food security. It speaks to the encouragement and promotion of investment in terms of research and development of new varieties. And it speaks to the development of expertise in terms of biodiversity and agriculture. These are all of the positives. So for those of you involved in farming, you want to ensure that you have access to the best varieties possible, offering you the best yields and lowering your costs. It means you can use less land, etc. This is the theory of it. So again, it helps if you have an international system and there's a standardized approach, it helps to reduce breeders' cost. And we mentioned the fact that it then encourages better use, etc. But they're not all positives. There are a lot of concerns. And when we think of having or giving people exclusive rights to things like plants, it can raise a number of questions because we want to ensure the cheapest and widest access to things like food, right? So for developing countries, because this system was developed in other environments, more industrialized environments, where farming is on a massive scale, agriculture is on a massive scale. So they developed the system, and then they said, well, you know what? We need, if you're going to be trading with us, that you have systems to protect plant varieties in your territory. And in the Caribbean, fortunately, we haven't bowed to the pressure. There's only one CARICOM country which has signed on to this convention, which is Trinidad and Tobago. And we can have a little conversation at the end as to whether or not we should be looking at this if the benefits outweigh the cost. But for small-scale farmers in a lot of developing countries, how do you get your seeds? You may save seeds, you may exchange seeds, people might give you seeds. There are a lot of informal practices involved. And the thing is, this convention restricts the use of farm-saved seeds or propagating materials from protected varieties. So even if you are able to get the seeds from a protected variety, you can't freely then decide you can just keep saving seeds or getting them from your neighbor or whoever. If they're protected, there's restricted access. So that's a major consideration. Some countries have developed their own systems, and you can do this. So we don't have to go the route of the UPOV Convention. There are other countries where they've developed their own systems, and this is something we need to think about, maybe as a way of achieving balance between promoting and encouraging research and investment and ensuring access. Having said that, the convention does allow for a limited farmer's exception where you can save seeds, and this is normally for those where there are traditional practices for small-scale at-home farmers do this. This will not apply for industrial farming. So I know this may be a new concept for a lot of you. Are any of you licensing protected varieties? Is this making sense for what you do in your day-to-day farming activities? No? Okay. In terms of setting up a protection system, you also have to think about the cost of having a system in place in your country, and the fact that we have limited expertise, limited capacity. And parallel with all of this, and I don't know, and you can tell me, are any of you familiar with the farmers' rights movement? Because there's this encouragement to set up protection systems, but on the other hand, there's also movements to ensure the recognition of farmers' rights. You're not familiar with this at all? Okay. Well, for farmers' rights, that seeks to ensure the conservation and sustainable use of genetic materials from plants for food and agriculture, and therefore it speaks directly to issues of food security. So if you have protection systems, you want to ensure that even your smaller scale farmers have continued access. So if you're interested, you can go to farmersrights.org to see what's going on internationally in that regard. Right, so as I said before, it's only Trinidad and Tobago that's actually signed on to the International Convention for the Protection of New Plant Varieties. Do you think this is something we should be actively considering? Do you think this is something that should be a priority for agricultural development in the region? Any thoughts? Yes. And you should know that, as far as I'm aware, Barbados is thinking of signing on, so you should be thinking of what the possible implications are. Yes.
Well, from Trinidad.
Yes, sir.
So I do agree with it in terms of, because right now we have a couple, like the Moruga Red and those things that would develop in Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it would give us some kind of exclusivity and protection on the international market.
Mm-hmm.
So that is how I look at it. And then like the Moruga Hill Rice, they're looking to get like GI certification for it.
Well, GI is different from a new plant variety protection, but okay.
Yeah, but I guess it might be along the same line in terms of thinking-wise. So I do agree that it does, maybe not from, if you look at it from the farmer's point of view, but maybe protection on the international market. Again, be able to attract premium pricing and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I look at it.
All right. Any other, I think you had, both of you? You had a question, sir? You didn't have a question?
Yes, I have a question.
Sorry, so that's, I thought he'd raised his hand before.
As it relates to indigenous medicinal herbs and so on, I'm just relating now to Barbados. It sounds nice, might sound nice for Trinidad and so on, but for our neck of the woods, I think we really need to consider how we go forward with these kinds of international conventions, because down the road, because I think also when you register, you also have to deliver samples and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I have my concerns.
All right. Let me hear this other question, then I have a couple comments.
I had put up my hand too.
Yes.
I don't know enough about it, but I don't like the idea of the large commercial ventures that restrict people from doing what they've been accustomed to doing. So that is because that's one of the threats here that needs more careful study before we decide. Because the same thing has happened in pharmaceuticals, and so that's my caution for careful study.
Okay. So my perspective is, in terms of food security, we need to ensure we have access to the best possible seeds available in terms of pest resistance, in terms of increased yields, et cetera, in terms of increased nutritional value. So if it requires that we have to be part of a system, international system of protection to access these things, I would suggest that we look at what countries like Thailand have done. And Thailand is different in that they have different levels of protection in different circumstances. But to ensure, at the very least, we try to tailor something that meets our requirements. Secondly, I think in terms of encouraging research and development. So we talk about STEM development, STEM studies, etc. And this is really just type of areas it speaks to. We do have the possibility of developing varieties here, which would be of commercial interest internationally, not just in terms of agriculture, but also horticulture. So as a form of revenue generation, there are positive possibilities, I think, for the region. But I do understand and share the concerns, but I think for once, rather than just adopting whatever we're told is out there, that we proactively seek to shape something that's relevant to our circumstances. Yes?
Well, I understand that, you know, the ones who would have developed the breeds or whatever, they did the research, the studies, and all the investment, right? After I've purchased something from you, whatever the price may be, it should be. After I've purchased something from you, whatever the price may be, it should be my liberty to do what I feel like with it.
Well, you aren't purchasing it, you're licensing it.
No, what I mean in terms of like, be it the seed I buy from you and I produce, if I save back seeds, why should you be hampering me saving back seeds? Because I purchased from you from the beginning. If I buy a dog from someone, you know, specific characteristics, the bloodline or whatever, you know, I keep the dog and I could choose to breed it.
But in order for the owners of these rights to make money off of them, when you go and you purchase the seed, it's going to be under certain conditions, single use or whatever. And it's set up so that they can make money. As I said, there are some exceptions. There are some exceptions for traditional type farming and small scale farming. And if we do sign up to the convention, we would need to make clear the application of these exceptions in our environment.
And then, you know, there's also the case where somebody down the road purchase a seed and then that cross-pollinate with a variety I have, you know, me unknowingly saving seeds, you know, that's not purposely done by me, you know, that's putting me at risk.
Yes. The thing is, Glenn, as I was saying, these systems were developed in industrialized countries where you have farming on a totally different scale. And there is a conflict in developing countries and our farming practices, our needs, our capacity, et cetera, to participate in the same way in these systems. So I wouldn't advocate that we just sign on full stop. I really strongly advocate that we do need to promote more research and development. We do need to find increased commercial possibilities for our varieties, and people are working, developing varieties, et cetera. And I think in the region, I think they should have the opportunity to be able to commercialize those. I think we can tailor systems that, for example, you may differentiate the breeding of varieties for agriculture compared, say, with horticulture, right? So I get where you're coming from, and these are very everyday realities for agriculture in developing countries, but I would suggest that we have the opportunity to tailor our own systems. Yes. Any other questions? Okay. So you mentioned, the Trini friend here mentioned geographical indications, and this may be a little slightly more familiar to you. The development of geographical indications, the promotion of geographical indications in the region has been ongoing for the past few years. Again, this is something that's very much encouraged under the international trade agreements we have. So, what am I talking about? So this is a similar concept to trademarks. But here, you're using signs specifically for origin-linked products, which means that the goods or products would have originated in a particular territory or region, and because of that territorial link, they have a certain reputation, quality, or other characteristic. And usually we're talking about traditional products using traditional methods. And I gave some examples, some regional examples. So you have Jamaica jerk, you have Blue Mountain coffee, you have the West Indies Sea Island cotton, which is an origin-linked product, because the West Indies Sea Island cotton has, I think, the longest fiber for cotton fiber, and it has certain qualities that cannot be replicated anywhere else because of the specific geographical conditions in the West Indies, on the islands where it's grown, right? And you may know some international examples. So most people would know of champagne. Champagne, although you may use it to refer to any bubbly white wine, is actually a geographical indication that only applies to a sparkling wine from the Champagne region in France. Similarly with Scotch whiskey. Scotch whiskey must come from Scotland and be made under certain, using certain methodologies, etc. They don't always have geographical names. Another famous example is feta cheese. So feta is not a geographical name, but you would associate, for those of you who know it, would associate it with Greece. So it's a type of Greek cheese. So you sometimes in many countries will have specific legislation offering protection for these types of signs. And they grant an exclusive right to the use of that sign on the related products. So this is another form of intellectual property, and it's very much used for agricultural products in the agro-processing industry. So if you have a registered geographical indication, you are able to prohibit the false representation that a good has originated in a specific region by affixing it. So you can't or shouldn't, Jamaica jerk is a registered GI, so you can't make your jerk here in Barbados and put on Jamaica jerk. You'd be falsely representing that the product originated in Jamaica. Even you have territorial restrictions. So I gave the example of Champagne. Champagne is a specific region. So you cannot produce a sparkling wine in another part of France, in Paris, and then call it Champagne, because it did not come from the Champagne region. So are you starting to understand how you're using these signs to distinguish your goods in the market? You can't use it, you know, people put on style, kind, type. I gave an example here to show you with the Jamaican style, but this is with wines and spirits. You can't say a California-like wine. I mean, you can, but you would be infringing, right? You can't use them to create, sorry, you have a question?
I just want to clarify that you're saying Jamaican style is an infringement. Because I'm a Jamaican, and most of you can hear, and it annoys me when I see that. Or even just jerk used on, without Jamaica, but used on a product. I know it doesn't taste anything like the original jerk, so sorry.
Yes, the case we heard of recently with the chef Jamie Oliver, where he had jerk rice, Jamaica jerk rice, which is not an actual product. Yeah, sorry.
Can GIs be attributed to hybrids?
To hybrids?
Yeah.
Okay, so we are now going back into the plant varieties.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm bringing it back now. I mean, back to it's like the Trinitario cocoa bean, right? Which is a hybrid, but they say it originated in Trinidad, right? But can GI be attributed to that?
All right, so we have to separate. So in the case of that cocoa bean, let's assume it could have been deliberately bred and developed as a variety, right? And if it meets the requirements for a new plant variety, it could be registered as such. Separate from that, because you can have multiple forms of protection for a product, yeah? Separate from that, you would know that they're developing a GI for the cocoa beans, the Trinidadian cocoa, and that is now based, yes, on the fact it's this bean, and it has there's a particular flavor, et cetera, not just because of the particular bean, but because of where it's grown and the production techniques, et cetera, right? Okay. So you can have, on the one hand, the possibility of a new plant variety protection, where a new type of bean variety is grown or cultivated. And on the other hand, you can have a GI protection, right? Based on the specific qualities and characteristics due to where it's grown and the methods, growing methods, etc. All right. Sorry. So you can't use the GI or you can't use it in a manner to create unfair competition, where then you're misleading the public as to the origin, the quantity, the manufacturing process, etc. So these are all acts that having a registered GI would prevent. So who owns the GI? A GI application can be filed by producers, a consumer group, marketing organizations, and once registered, it's only the producers who are listed with the registrar, in the register, that will be permitted to use the GI. So in Barbados, you would go to the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office, and the application is filed. Once it's successful and there's a GI approved, only those producers who are listed can actually then use the GI. It's not an easy process, and it's not a cheap process. You have to normally have a producers group involved. So in the case of Jamaica Jerk, they would have set up an association. And, you know, having and maintaining an association is easier said than done sometimes. So there's that angle. Then government is a grant, it's a right granted by government, and there's an administrative cost to government. Then, importantly, you have the GI, but you have to build the brand. You have to market it, people have to be aware of it. And that's a cost, especially when you're going to be exporting, etc. So if you come up with a sign that says Jamaica jerk, consumers have to be aware of that and know to look for the products bearing that sign. So you have to be able to invest in marketing and branding. And as in all forms of intellectual property rights, you have to be able to monitor and enforce. And this means you have the rights, but that will not stop people from infringing. You then have to actively monitor the market, see who may be infringing, and then seek to enforce your rights, which means you have to be able to bear associated legal cost. So it's not a cheap and easy process, but we understand that there could be high potential value, because having the GI means that you're able to facilitate premium pricing, you're offering something that's authentic and with associated qualities and characteristics. It helps you with product differentiation. It means that you're increasing value along the supply chain, because obviously to create a product, there's an entire chain behind that. Because it's normally applicable to traditional products, GIs are thought to stimulate rural agriculture and production. So this is one of the reasons why GI protection is encouraged. Obviously, with that, you will have job creation, and it can help in the preservation of traditional knowledge and biodiversity. You're keeping up the traditional way of doing things. And as you know, consumers are into authenticity. So these are some of the values or benefits of GIs. So you can go this route to have protection, or you can go back to the trademark system. So for example, the United States doesn't have geographical indications legislation. You get protection in a very similar way through the trademark system. So alternatively, there are these things called collective marks. So a collective mark is owned by an association or cooperative, and it's used to distinguish the origin, characteristics, and production methods used by its members. Use of these types of marks are subject to regulations, so you have to have regulations saying how you apply the mark, who can use the mark, etc. And although it's not for geographical indication purposes, you have some familiarity with collective marks when you have initiatives like 100% Beijing. Once the products can be shown to be a certain percentage Beijing origin, etc., you then can apply this 100% Beijing logo, right? So that's the type of concept we're talking about. And then there's another type of mark you can use, which is the certification mark. Again, you may be familiar with this. I use it for trade here, but for those of you who may be into organic farming, now there are certain certifications internationally for organic farming. You can't or shouldn't just apply them to your products, but you would have had to meet certain criteria, etc. Or for those of you with clothing, you may see the mark showing wool mark, and or the same for cotton. So these systems are used quite widely internationally, and a certification mark is used to confirm or to guarantee that the goods to which it has been applied originate in a specific geographical region, they have certain characteristics, meet certain standards. and it is owned usually by an association, company, or public entity. There are regulations as to use, but the big difference between that and a collective mark is that the certification mark is not or cannot be used by the owner of the mark. The owner of the mark can administer its use, but they can't use it themselves. If a collective mark, the owner can use it as well. So instead of going the route of having a GI and trying to establish an entire system around geographical indications, you can also go the route of having a specific type of trademark which is used by a group of producers, either a collective trademark or a certification trademark, which can achieve similar objectives. So, any questions? I've posed a question here, but any questions? I hope I'm not boring you silly. Is there, you think we should be looking at promoting the use of GIs? Do you think they will bring any real benefit to the region? Remember, you have to set up an entire system around them. Should we just look at maybe going the road? I know in Barbados we always talk about the black-bellied sheep. I know there's an initiative with our rum. So we could maybe go the road to the GI. As I said, in the US, there is no GI system, so you will still also have to register a collective or certification mark. You usually have to do both anyway. All right, Gail, are there any questions online, or can we? Okay. So the final section gets a bit more technical, and we're going to be looking at patents. So, yes? Yes, I know. I'm going to do it at the end. So, okay. So in terms of patents, here we're going to be looking a lot at animal breeding. And I don't just have, this is an ordinary sheep here, by the way. This is Dolly the sheep. This is a sheep that was in the news big time a couple decades ago because it was a cloned sheep. And it raised a lot of controversy. So it's not just a sheep, it's Dolly the sheep, right? And what are patents? You would have heard of patents, I'm sure, before. They're a specific type of intellectual property right. And they're used specifically for the protection of technical inventions. They can be processes or products, and in some countries, uses. But we're talking about inventions. And as with other forms of intellectual property rights, you get a legal monopoly granted when you have a patent. So generally, you will have the rights for 20 years. These rights are all territorial. So if you have a patent in Barbados, it's for the territory of Barbados. So, as with other forms of intellectual property, you get these monopoly or exclusive rights because there needs to be some way of encouraging people to invest in innovation and creativity. But in exchange for these exclusive rights, which means that you can then charge higher or you can restrict access, there's an exchange made. You have to fully disclose your invention to the extent that someone with sufficient skill, a reasonable level of skill, can replicate your invention. So when you apply for the patent, you're disclosing, you have to give information that fully discloses your invention. And then you get these exclusive rights once it is non-obvious once it's novel and industrially applicable, you can then get the rights exclusively to use or determine how your invention is used for 20 years, up to 20 years. Thereafter, anybody can use it. So when I say you have to fully disclose, this always gets people, why you have to tell? Yes. Why? Because the exchanges, you get to have these exclusive rights and make a lot of money, hopefully. But what we want, what the state wants, what the public gets out of this, is the advancement of knowledge. So other researchers can then come along, look at what you've done, and improve on it. And this is how knowledge advances, right? So that's the exchange made. So in terms of agriculture, patents can be important in terms of innovations such as equipment and tools, but it's also very important for animal breeding, right? This is where it gets really interesting. So you have the traditional technical type inventions, and then you have this idea of animal breeding. So examples of the type of innovations that have come along in the world of patenting, things like artificial insemination, multiple ovulation and embryo transfer, superovulation, sex selection, freezing sperm, and increasingly genome engineering and editing. You've heard of these things? Do you use any of these? Have you used any of these, like artificial insemination or anything? Yes. So,
Which type of IP would a recipe come under?
Right. So you may think patents, but in fact, usually recipes are protected. It's not really an intellectual property right. It's similar, but you may have heard of trade secrets or confidentiality. And why would you go that route for a recipe? Because if you go for a patent, which is a very high bar to reach, you then have to disclose the recipe. So from a commercial perspective, that doesn't really make sense, because at least 20 years later, anybody can use your recipe. So if you think about it, the Coca-Colas, the KFCs of the world, they go the route of secrecy. So it's not an IP right, but it's similar, and they're called trade secrets, or you use confidentiality under common law. So I would advise you to, and that's another session. I don't have the time to give a lot of information, but I would say that you look up how you use trade secrecy as a form of protection. Or you can contact me after and I'll give you a few more details. All right, so the thing with patents and the use for patents in terms of animal breeding is that it raises a lot of ethical issues. And most legislations, there's a discretion under your patent legislation to exempt animals from patentability, except microorganisms. So under the International Trade Agreement, and you realize I keep mentioning international trade agreements, because a lot of the encouragement, let's call it, to have intellectual property systems is coming through the international trading system. If you want to do trade with my country, you have to ensure you have systems to protect our inventors and creators. So the major agreement for intellectual property rights in terms of trade is called the TRIPS agreement, And TRIPS says that you have to have patent protection at least for microorganisms and for non-biological processes. So initially, no one thought, years ago when you first had the patent system developed, really no one thought that this would be, you'd be reached a time when you'd be thinking of applying patents to animals or even pharmaceuticals, because these are, you're talking about things that are essential to life. And that has changed somewhat, but there's still a lot of restrictions in terms of, for example, where it comes to human beings. And the first patent which was granted for a biological class other than microorganism was for a mouse. I don't know if you heard of the Uncle Mouse case, where researchers at Harvard developed a mouse for cancer research that had certain characteristics. And they sought a patent. And it was very controversial. In some countries they got the patent, in others they didn't. But the point is, we're seeing that shift happen. And as we think of the patenting system and animals, it may be useful to think of maybe differentiating animal breeding for agriculture and food and animal breeding for research and development. Should the patent system apply to both situations in the same way? Because remember, you have the patent, you have the right to restrict access. Right. So initially, the patent system would have excluded plant varieties and animal breeds. And eventually, they developed a specific system for the protection of new plant varieties. But in terms of animals, you've seen some shifting happening in terms of the patenting system. And you can patent genomes, which would grant the owner exclusive rights for use of a gene or a modified gene, and or ownership of the way of isolating and obtaining a gene. Now that sounds maybe like a bit of technical mumbo-jumbo, but when you think about the fact that genes are so important for determining disease and how to cure disease, and then you have companies which are owning the genomes, you can see why there'd be a lot of ethical questions. And outside of farming and agriculture, I had done some research, and there are about 13,000 patents which cover the genomes of just under 900 sea creatures. And one company owns 75% of all of those. These include things like from sharks and whales down to sea urchins. So I'm going a little bit off, but here in Barbados, where we're talking about our blue economy. Our blue economy speaks to the use of the sea and the resources of the sea. And how are we going to ensure that we fully benefit from whatever possible resources we may have in our waters? We don't really engage heavily in this type of research. And then if you have these international companies which own the rights in genetic material, what does that say for our ability to, in terms of future development? That's just a question to think about. So under our Patent Act here in Barbados, there are certain things that they exclude from patentability, including surgery and diagnostic methods. And this is in most countries. Because if you had patents in these areas, it means that a doctor might not be able to carry out the surgery that's necessary to save your life. It's as simple as that. So there are certain restrictions to allow for medical care, basic medical care. In terms of the plant varieties, as I said, there are specific systems outside of patenting that have been developed for plant varieties. So in terms of some of the ethical and social issues raised, there are things like suffering to animals, the possibility in terms of decreasing genetic diversity. Because, you know, a lot of the work is to, quote unquote, improve genes, to get rid of diseases, or if you may want to have everybody with blue eyes or whatever. So that type of interference means that you could eventually reduce the level of diversity out there, because you're trying to make things perfect or to meet certain commercial needs. So you get rid of what is not attractive or necessary. Interference with nature. So playing God. This is one of the strongest objections. Then, in some countries, we don't have clear exceptions to infringement for research using patented inventions. So in terms of doing research in an area, let's say diabetes, which might be crucial for the Caribbean, if there are patents involved, our researchers may find that they're restricted in how and what they're able to research. In terms of improving animal breeds, you may come across certain restrictions because of patents. They can result in threats to conventional small-scale farming because they're blocking access. So in terms of improving the breeds you have available to you and access to them, or even knowledge, equipment, or whatever, patents, of course, play a role, because certain technologies, once they're patented, are going to be more expensive. So even though they may be tremendous use in terms of developing our agriculture, we simply can't afford to license and access these technologies. And similarly, you can have the owners of patents and other forms of intellectual property having exclusive agreements with certain companies locally, for example. So if you have if I have an exclusive agreement with you, it means that everyone else is left out of the picture. So these are possible effects of having patents and developing patents, and how patents can affect you in terms of agriculture. I'm not saying that the patent system is a negative thing necessarily. I'm just saying once again that we have to be aware of these issues and ensure you as farmers, you as people in agriculture, you need to understand clearly what your needs are, understand the systems that exist, and then try to advocate to ensure that these systems meet your requirements. And again, there's a discussion question. Do you think that the grant of patents and the increased use of the patent system would stimulate research and assist regional farmers in terms of developing improved breeds, animal breeds? Do you think this is something we need to be pushing more? I see the guy shaking his head, so you can explain why.
Well, the black belly sheep is the best example for here. Having put it under a contract or a patent, other places wouldn't be able, or other individuals or companies would not be able to fully exploit it the way we cannot right now, because our industry is not quite developed to handle all the benefits that it would allow. So if we patent it, even if we cannot fully exploit the advantages, we will be able to save that for further date.
All right.
That opportunity for further.
So in terms of black belly sheep, let's be clear, you can't patent animals as such. right?
Yeah.
But the genomes, you can research and patent certain genomes and so on, or you can seek to improve or develop the breed.
I should have been specific to
Okay.
the strain that we have now because it's been developed over several years, and
Okay.
what we had before is pretty pathetic to the product that we have now, so, or
Okay.
the animal we have now.
So in terms of using animal breeding and the patent system to improve what we have here, whether it's a black belly sheep or otherwise, what we would need to understand, or researchers would need to understand, is before we put it out into the market, we can't do it years later. It has to be novel. It has to be new. So you can have research done in terms of the animal breeds, but you have to then, to get a patent, it would have to be novel. It has to be done at a very early stage, right? So moving forward, there are possibilities. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Well, that's the end. What I'm going to do is, before you leave quickly, because I know we're over time, there are a couple things. Remember the question I asked at the beginning, what should be the priorities of to develop our agricultural sector? And I was told improve marketability, improve access to markets, grading and standards, improving food security, research and literature, improving yields and variety, and ensuring that we maintain agricultural lands. Do you think the intellectual property rights system would allow for any of these based on what we discussed today? Do you see the IP system as facilitating any of these or all of these priorities? Yes or no? Who thinks so? Just show by a show of hand. Yes, the IP system helps with these priorities. We have 3 people. So I'm going to assume that after what we've discussed today, we're not seeing intellectual property as assisting in achieving these priorities. Okay. No, it wasn't a right or wrong question. All right, and finally, very quickly, to address the questions from the stream. Do regional standards affect design? Yes. In terms of design development, you do have to bear standards in mind, and this is why you should try to identify and work with good designers who are also aware of the relevant standards. Cost of registration of a industrial design, I cannot remember. I think it may be $50. I don't want to mislead you. It's not very burdensome. So you will have to, and it varies locally, so you'll have to check with the local IP office, but it is not particularly expensive. Then the Madrid Protocol. All right, so very quickly, there's an international system called the Madrid Protocol, which helps to alleviate some of the cost of registering a trademark in multiple countries. It is not an international trademark you get. What it is instead of having to file an application in multiple territories, you file a single application for multiple territories. So it reduces the cost and administration. In the region, it's only Antigua that signed on to the system, but I do know that there is increasing pressure from the private sector to have other territories sign on because of the cost of registering trademarks in multiple territories. So I hope I've answered all the questions.
There was one more online about the average cost of registering a trademark in CARICOM, within CARICOM region.
I have no idea for CARICOM. I do know for the U.S. it's about $3,000 U.S. but I can't honestly say I can tell you for in all the CARICOM territories.
I would just say, add to what Erica just said, if you go to, in Barbados, if you go to the CAIPO website, it's very helpful and giving you costs and telling you where to go and has all the forums there. So for Barbados, and I'm sure Trinidad and Jamaica at least have that as well on their website.
A lot of the items have the information online, to be honest. So you just visit your local intellectual property office. All right, so no one is actually looking at me. If you have any other questions, please let me know. I hope, I know it was a lot of information and it could get a little technical, but I hope at least when you leave here, you will not talk about copyrighting your business. And you have a little more clarity about the different forms of intellectual property. So thank you very much. That's it.
Okay, on behalf of Caribbean Export and as well as ICA for giving us this opportunity, I would like to thank Erica for this very introductory presentation on intellectual property rights. As she said, you can contact her. All her information is there if you have any further questions. And I will reiterate that the local intellectual property offices, if they don't have a website, you can visit their offices, and they're quite helpful, and that's where you need to go. If you have any questions in your jurisdiction, you can call your intellectual property office. That's the first place you should always go. So thank you for that. In addition, thank you, Erica, once again. I just have one more, ICA also has a couple more presentations to give you today. We have here as well the Government Analytical Services Office from Barbados. They'll be presented on lab testing to support agriculture, as well as the representative from Pine Hill Dairy, the Quality Assurance Manager, who will be presented on labeling for export. I know right now it's a very long, you've had a long presentation, everyone is probably hungry. So if you're interested in these two presentations, I would suggest we have literally a 10-minute break to change over, and you can stay for that presentation as well on behalf of ICA. Thank you.